Paul Kagame, the current president of Rwanda. He was born on October 23, 1957, in Tambwe, located in what was then Rwanda-Urundi, now part of southern Rwanda. He was born into a Tutsi family during a period of growing ethnic tension in the region. Kagame was the youngest of 6 children born to Diagratias Rutagambwa and Esteria. His family had royal ties and was politically prominent within the Tutsi ethnic group. Due to the ethnic violence that flared against the Tutsi in 1959, during the build-up to Rwandan independence from Belgium, Kagame's parents fled with him to Uganda, where he grew up in exile. Paul Kagame had 5 siblings. His mother, Esteria Rutagambwa, had 4 daughters and 2 sons, which includes Paul Kagame himself. This means he had 4 sisters and 1 brother. One of his sisters is named Malisi Rutagambwa. At only 2 years old, Kagame went into exile with his family, eventually settling in the neighboring British colony of Uganda. The family initially lived in the Gahanj refugee camp in southwest Uganda, where they arrived around 1962, the same year the Belgians handed power to a Hutu regime in Rwanda. Kagame spent approximately 30 years living as a refugee in Uganda. He described this experience as deeply formative, stating, "I grew up in a refugee camp in Uganda, and I lived there for 30 years. That shapes one's character." He also recalled experiencing injustices of every kind during his 3 decades in refugee camps. As a boy, Kagame remembers asking his parents why they were homeless, thinking they must have done something. His parents told him about the massacres, which planted the seed of rebellion in him. He later explained, "It's on that basis that we, young people, thought of organizing. Even if it meant fighting, we would do that." Kagame began his primary education in a school near the refugee camp. It was during this time in the refugee camp that he met his friend and future comrade Fred Rwigema, who would later play a crucial role in the Rwandan Patriotic Front. Kagame also lost his father when he was 14 years old. After completing his primary education near the refugee camp in Uganda, Kagame attended Ntea Secondary School, the respected institution, before being suspended at age 15 following a decline in his academic performance after his father's death in the early 1970s. He subsequently completed his studies at Old Kampala Secondary School. He then studied in Kampala between 1972 and 1976, and according to some sources, he attended Makerere University in Kampala. However, this claim has been disputed, with some critics asserting that Kagame dropped out of high school and did not attend university. Other sources indicate he later earned a diploma in professional management and business studies from the Open University of London. In 1979, at the age of 22, Kagame joined the forces of Yoweri Museveni, who was leading a guerrilla war against Uganda's government. Kagame specialized in intelligence gathering and rose to a position close to Museveni. After Museveni's National Resistance Army, the NRA, captured Kampala in 1986 and formed a new government, Kagame was appointed as a senior officer in the new Ugandan Army, serving as head of military intelligence from 1986 to 1990. In 1990, Kagame was selected by the Ugandan Army for advanced military training at the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. This was Kagame's first visit to the United States. The training was part of a program for distinguished Allied officers. However, Kagame's time at Fort Leavenworth was cut short. In October 1990, while he was attending the training course, the Rwandan Patriotic Front, RPF, launched its invasion of Rwanda. Kagame left the military college and returned to Africa to take command of the RPF after its initial leader, Fred Rwigema, was killed in battle. This marked the beginning of his 4-year armed struggle that ultimately ended the Rwandan genocide in 1994. As the 1980s closed, Kagame and 3 other expatriate Rwandan military leaders formed the Tutsi-led Rwandan Patriotic Front, RPF, and plotted an invasion of their homeland. In October 1990, while Kagame was studying at Fort Leavenworth, the RPF staged its first attack on government forces in Rwanda. After the RPF's initial leader, Fred Rwigema, who was killed in battle, Kagame returned to Africa to take command of the movement. This marked the end of his service in the Ugandan Army and the beginning of his 4-year armed struggle to liberate Rwanda, which culminated in the defeat of the genocidal government in July 1994. The RPF's roots trace back to 1979, when Tutsi Rwandans living in exile in Uganda formed an organization known as the Rwandan Alliance for National Unity, RWANO. Its primary goals were the return of Tutsi refugees to Rwanda and the governance of the country without the divisive identity politics of the past. Many RWANO members, including Fred Rwigema and Paul Kagame, were active in Yoweri Museveni's resistance movement in Uganda during this period. Through their participation in the Ugandan Bush War, these exiled Rwandans gained valuable guerrilla warfare experience and the confidence to begin planning their own revolution in Rwanda. In 1987, RWANO was reorganized and renamed the Rwandan Patriotic Front in Katania, RPF. The armed wing of the group was named the Rwandan Patriotic Army, RPA. While in exile, the RPF recruited Hutu leaders as well, including Alexis Kanyorengwa, who was named vice chairman, and Pastor Bizimungu. The RPF was composed mainly of exiled Rwandans of Tutsi heritage who had left the country during episodes of Hutu-Tutsi violence. In 1990, Paul Kagame and 3 other expatriate Rwandan military leaders formed the Tutsi-led RPF and plotted an invasion of their homeland. Kagame joined the RPF that year, taking control of the group when its initial leader, Fred Rwigema, was killed on the second day of the invasion. The RPF launched its liberation struggle in October 1990, when RPA troops invaded Rwanda from Uganda. By 1993, the RPF controlled significant territory in Rwanda, and a ceasefire was negotiated. The RPF's military campaign culminated in July 1994, when it defeated the genocidal government and ended the Rwandan genocide. On October 1, 1990, Tutsi-led rebels from the Rwandan Patriotic Front, RPF, invaded Rwanda from Uganda. The Rwandan Patriotic Army, RPA, the armed wing of the RPF, crossed the Ugandan border into Rwanda, initiating the Rwandan Civil War, known in Rwanda as the Liberation War. The RPF's goal was to force the Rwandan government, under President Juvenal Habyarimana, to address the problem of the hundreds of thousands of Rwandan exiles. The rebels claimed they were fighting for the right of Tutsi refugees to return home and for the overthrow of a repressive government. Rwigema was shot in the head and killed at Nyabwenshagosi Hill, just one day after leading approximately 2,500 RPF fighters across the Ugandan border into Rwanda. His death threw the invasion into chaos. The RPF was destabilized by the loss of its leader, and the Rwandan army, benefiting from the loss of RPF morale, enjoyed a major tactical advantage. By the end of October, the Rwandan government forces, with French military assistance during Operation Noroit, had regained all the ground taken by the RPF and pushed the rebels back to the Ugandan border. Many soldiers deserted or some crossed back into Uganda while others went into hiding. At the time of the invasion, Paul Kagame was attending a military training course at Fort Leavenworth in the United States. When he learned of Rwigema's death on October 5, he departed immediately to take command of the RPF troops. He flew through London and Addis Ababa to Entebbe Airport, where he was given safe passage by a friend in the Ugandan Secret Service, and crossed into Rwanda on October 15. Kagame later described his arrival as one of the worst experiences of his life. The troops lacked organization following Rwigema's death and were demoralized after their losses in the war. However, Kagame was well known to the RPF troops, many of whom had fought with him in the Ugandan army, and they welcomed his arrival in the field. Rwigema's death also accelerated Kagame's rise to the leadership of the RPF. Kagame, who had been attending the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College, returned to Africa to become the movement's military commander. He took over command of the RPF and led it until the capture of Kigali in July 1994. The RPF's eventual victory in the Civil War and its role in ending the genocide were thus directly shaped by the leadership transition forced by Rwigema's untimely death. The Rwandan government army, with French military assistance, pushed the RPF back over the border within the first month of combat. However, in 1991, a reorganized RPF began a guerrilla war, attacking Rwanda from bases in Uganda. In June 1992, RPF troops won a substantial foothold in Rwandan territory, which was followed by protracted negotiations between the RPF and the Rwandan government, producing the Arusha Accords concluded in August 1993. Despite several ceasefires, conflict often reignited after pogroms and massacres against Rwanda's Tutsi population, with multiple skirmishes occurring in 1991, 1992, and 1993. When news of the RPF offensive broke on October 1, 1990, Rwandan President Juvenal Habyarimana requested assistance from France in fighting the invasion. The French president's son, Jean-Christophe Mitterrand, who headed the government's Africa cell, promised to send troops. The French military launched Operation Noroit in October 1990 under a technical military assistance agreement between France and Rwanda. Rwigema was killed on October 2, 1990, the second day of the invasion, under disputed circumstances. The exact circumstances of his death remain contested. The official line of Kagame's government, and the version mentioned by historian Gerard Prunier, was that Rwigema was killed by a stray bullet. Other accounts suggest he may have been killed by fellow RPF members. The sources describe a convergence of two factors that gave the Rwandan army a major tactical advantage: French military assistance and the loss of RPF morale following Rwigema's death. The FPR was destabilized by the death of Fred Rwigema and defeated by the military support given by France to the regime of Juvenal Habyarimana during Operation Noroit. By the end of October 1990, the Rwandan army, with French assistance and benefiting from the loss of RPF morale, had regained all the ground taken by the RPF and pushed the rebels back to the Ugandan border. Many RPF soldiers deserted, or some crossed back into Uganda while others went into hiding. Paul Kagame, who had led the Rwandan Patriotic Front, RPF, since returning from military training in the United States following Fred Rwigema's death in 1990, commanded the RPF's armed forces during the genocide. As leader of the RPF, Kagame led the military campaign to defeat the Hutu extremist forces responsible for the killings. The RPF's invasion of Rwanda is widely cited as the primary reason the genocide ended. During the genocide, Kagame led the RPF to defeat Hutu extremist forces, minimizing casualties through artillery attacks and eventually retaking Kigali in July 1994. Led by Kagame, the Rwandan Patriotic Army defeated the genocidal government in July 1994, effectively halting the genocide. The RPF's military victory brought an end to the 100-day slaughter that had claimed over 1 million victims. Following the Rwandan Patriotic Front's RPF military victory that ended the 1994 genocide, Paul Kagame assumed the dual roles of Vice President and Minister of Defense in the Government of National Unity on July 19, 1994. Hutu politician Pastor Bizimungu was sworn in as president of the new government, while Kagame became Vice President, Commander-in-Chief of the Rwandan Patriotic Army, RPA, and Minister of Defense. Although Bizimungu held the presidential title, Kagame was widely considered Rwanda's de facto leader during this period. While Bizimungu and his cabinet had some control over domestic affairs, Kagame remained commander-in-chief of the army and was the de facto ruler of the country. He focused primarily on military affairs, foreign relations, and national security rather than day-to-day governance. By 2000, with the threat posed by cross-border rebels reduced, Kagame decided to seek the presidency himself when Bizimungu resigned. Pastor Bizimungu, Rwanda's first post-genocide president, resigned on March 23, 2000, after a series of escalating disputes with senior members of the Rwandan Patriotic Front, RPF. His resignation marked the culmination of growing tensions within the Government of National Unity that had been in place since July 1994. The immediate trigger for Bizimungu's resignation was a dispute over the makeup of a new cabinet. Political experts noted that Bizimungu had clashed with colleagues in the Tutsi-dominated governing party over the composition of the new government. He resigned in March 2000 specifically over this disagreement regarding the new cabinet. Throughout his presidency, Bizimungu was widely viewed as a figurehead, with RPF commander Paul Kagame serving as vice president and minister of defense, holding the real power. Bizimungu soon found himself in conflict with Kagame over what he argued was unjustified repression of dissent. The relationship between the two leaders soured over time, ultimately leading to Bizimungu's departure. In his letter of resignation to the National Assembly, Bizimungu cited personal reasons. Following his resignation, Kagame was appointed interim president and subsequently elected president by the Transitional National Assembly on April 17, 2000, taking the oath of office on April 22, 2000. The following year, Bizimungu founded the Party for Democratic Renewal, which was immediately banned by Kagame's government. In 2004, he was sentenced to 15 years in prison for attempting to form a militia, inciting violence, and embezzlement, but was pardoned 3 years later by Kagame. Some accounts suggest more direct involvement by Kagame. Weeks before Bizimungu resigned, his advisor, Asiol Kabara, was killed outside his home by men in military uniforms, and it has been alleged that Kabara was killed on the orders of Paul Kagame. Additionally, some sources note that Bizimungu resigned, most likely having been forced to do so, following a falling out with the RPF. Following Bizimungu's resignation, Kagame was appointed interim president and subsequently elected president by the Transitional National Assembly on April 17, 2000, taking the oath of office on April 22, 2000. Kagame had been de facto leader since 1994 but had focused more on military, foreign affairs, and security than day-to-day governance. By 2000, with the threat from cross-border rebels reduced, he decided to seek the presidency himself. On April 17, 2000, Kagame was unanimously elected President of the Republic of Rwanda by the Transitional National Assembly. He took the oath of office on April 22, 2000. Some sources note that Kagame served as acting president from March 24, 2000, until his formal swearing-in on April 22, 2000. The transitional constitution was still in effect at the time, which meant the president was elected by government ministers and the Transitional National Assembly rather than by popular vote. 3.5 years later, in August 2003, Kagame won a landslide victory in the country's first-ever democratically contested multi-party elections, securing approximately 95% of the vote. He has subsequently been re-elected in 2010, 2017, and 2024, with each election resulting in overwhelming majorities. Kagame won Rwanda's first multi-party presidential election on August 25, 2003, with 95.05% of the vote. This was the first election following his ascent to the presidency in 2000, and it was also the first to bar opposition candidates from campaigning. The election took place shortly after the last genuine opposition party had been banned, and an EU observer mission concluded that political pluralism is more limited than during the transition period. Kagame was re-elected for a second 7-year term on August 9, 2010, with 93.07% of the vote. This was his lowest margin of victory across all 4 elections, though still a landslide. In the August 4, 2017 election, Kagame won a third term with 98.79% of the vote. Unlike in 2003 and 2010, even the semblance of a competitive electoral process had disappeared by this point, with the 2 main opposition parties announcing they would not field a candidate and expressing support for Kagame's bid. The election was described as more of a coronation than real contest. Kagame won a 4th term in the July 15, 2024 election with 99.18% of the vote, according to full provisional results. This represented his highest vote share yet, smashing his own previous record. His 2 opponents, Frank Habineza of the Democratic Green Party and independent candidate Philip Mpayimana, garnered just 0.5% and 0.32% of the vote respectively. Voter turnout was remarkably high at 98%. He was sworn in for his 4th term on August 11, 2024. Kagame's electoral dominance has been reinforced by constitutional amendments. In 2015, Rwandans voted in a referendum to remove the 2-term limit for the presidency and shorten the term length from 7 to 5 years, with 98.3% of the electorate endorsing the revised constitution. The amendment allowed the incumbent president to run for a third 7-year mandate, as well as 2 additional 5-year mandates in 2024 and 2029, potentially allowing Kagame to rule until 2034. Critics attribute Kagame's thundering majorities to the limited political space for opposition in Rwanda, with Human Rights Watch noting that opposition parties in Rwanda face administrative obstacles to registration and political pressure to toe the government line. His supporters, however, point to his popularity and Rwanda's stability and economic growth under his rule. Kagame served as chairperson of the African Union, AU, from January 2018 to February 2019. He was elected to the position, taking over from Alpha Condé, president of Guinea. His tenure lasted a 1-year term, concluding in February 2019. Following his chairmanship, Kagame continued to play an active role in AU affairs, leading the AU institutional reforms and serving as the AU champion for domestic health financing. Kagame also chaired the East African Community, EAC, from 2018 to 2021. He assumed the role of chairman of the EAC, taking over from Uganda's president. During his tenure, he chaired the 21st Ordinary Summit of the EAC Heads of State in February 2021. His chairmanship concluded in 2021 to 2022 when he handed over the role to Kenya's Uhuru Kenyatta. Beyond these positions, Kagame has also served as the Commonwealth Chair in office for 2 years from 2022. He has been described as having extended Rwanda's influence beyond its borders through these various leadership roles. Kagame serves as the African Union (AU) champion for domestic health financing, a role in which he leads continental efforts to increase domestic spending on health. He was appointed to this position in February 2019 through the African Leadership Meeting, ALM. In this capacity, he has called for reforms such as updating the annual scorecard to rank countries according to the WHO Service Coverage Index rather than exclusively per capita spending, and recommending that ODA NIPAD create regional platforms to support member states in increasing domestic health financing. Rwanda has emerged as a continental leader in this shift toward domestic health financing, with Kagame using the country as a best practice example for others to follow. In 2024, he hosted the Kigali High-Level Health Financing Conference, which brought together ministers of health and finance, heads of state, and multilateral partners to advance Africa's health security agenda. Kagame also serves as co-chair of the Broadband Commission for Sustainable Development, alongside Mexican businessman Carlos Slim Helu. The commission, established in 2010, has been chaired biannually by Kagame and Slim since its inception. It is co-chaired by ITU's Secretary General and UNESCO's Director General. In this role, Kagame champions access to information technology as a hallmark of his administration. He has called on stakeholders to continue mobilizing consumers to adopt broadband and to find relevant frameworks for extending its benefits. He has emphasized that the transformational impact of broadband on people's lives and global economies is no longer questionable. The remaining challenge is to extend these obvious benefits to the majority of global citizens. He has also stated that shaping the future of the digital economy and ensuring no one is left behind is a collective responsibility. Paul Kagame remains a popular figure both in Rwanda and internationally, with ongoing influence in African and global affairs. His leadership has been characterized by a focus on national unity, economic development, and improved social conditions, which have contributed to his sustained popularity despite facing criticism regarding political dissent and media freedom. Internationally, Kagame is regarded as a significant figure in African leadership. He has been described as, perhaps the most enigmatic and controversial figure in Africa, with his legacy being a subject of ongoing debate. Supporters view him as a principled leader who calmly rebuilt Rwanda following the genocide, while critics characterize his rule as a dictatorship implicated in human rights abuses. Despite these contrasting perspectives, he remains a popular figure both in Rwanda and abroad. The most natural comparison for Paul Kagame among world leaders is Nelson Mandela of South Africa, given that both are African leaders who emerged from liberation struggles and faced the monumental task of rebuilding their nations after catastrophic violence. However, their leadership styles, governance approaches, and legacies differ in fundamental ways. Both leaders came to power through liberation movements, Kagame as commander of the Rwandan Patriotic Front, RPF, that ended the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, and Mandela as the iconic figure of the anti-apartheid struggle who became South Africa's first democratically elected president in 1994. Both faced the challenge of uniting deeply divided societies. Kagame has emphasized national unity and reconciliation as hallmarks of his administration, while Mandela's leadership was characterized by forgiveness, inclusivity, and a focus on the future rather than revenge. Kagame himself has written admiringly of Mandela, describing him as an uncompromising enemy of injustice, an unwavering fighter for freedom, and praising his pursuit of national reconciliation over seeking revenge after 27 years of imprisonment. The most striking contrast lies in their governance approaches. Mandela's leadership is widely characterized as visionary, transformational, and rooted in democratic principles. He bequeathed his nation the rule of law, freedom of speech, and free and fair elections.